All right, buckle up, Skull Nation, because what I'm about to tell you might just break your heart before training camp even opens. Somewhere in the frozen tundra of Minnesota, two men are quietly holding together the entire future of the Vikings franchise on their shoulders, and almost nobody outside the state seems to fully appreciate it. We're talking about an offensive line duo so good, so battle-tested, so criminally underrated that even the so-called experts can't agree on how great they really are. But here's the twist nobody's talking about. This golden era might be closer to its final chapter than anyone wants to admit. Today we're diving deep into the rise, the injuries, the contract drama, and the uncertain future of Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill, the tackle tandem carrying the weight of purple pride on their backs. Stick around, because by the end of this, you're going to see the Vikings' offensive line in a whole new light. Let's start with the man in question, who might just be the most talented left tackle you've never fully seen at full strength. Christian Darrisaw. When healthy, and we mean truly healthy, this man is an absolute problem for opposing defenses. We're talking elite feet, violent hands, the kind of pass protection that makes quarterbacks sleep easy at night, and the rare ability to also maul people in the run game. Scouts and coaches around the league who study tape for a living will tell you when this man is right. He's in the conversation for best all-around left tackle in football, pure power moves, ridiculous mobility for a man his size, the total package. But here's the gut punch. Darrisaw has not made it through a single one of his 5 NFL seasons without missing time. Not one. And it all traces back to that brutal knee injury back in 2024. An injury so devastating that fans still argue about whether it happened on a moment of the game that even mattered. Spoiler alert, it happened on a play where the Vikings has already picked up positive yardage before halftime. Football can be cruel like that. One meaningless seeming rep, and suddenly a young superstar's career trajectory changes forever. And the fallout from that injury has haunted Darrisaw ever since. Last season alone was a roller coaster of setbacks. He came back in Week 3, presumably rushed onto the field before his body was fully ready, and from there, it was one hit after another. He got knocked out of the Cleveland game early, pulled after just 2 drives in a Thursday night showdown against the Chargers. A complete did not play against Seattle. And eventually, the inevitable, landing on injured reserve. When you add it all up, Darrisaw played just over 500 snaps last season, while his pass-blocking numbers were respectable 16th in the league. Only 19 total pressures allowed and just 2 sacks, the 8 penalties he racked up in such limited action. Here's where the story gets genuinely hopeful, and honestly kind of exciting if you're a Vikings fan. Reports out of organized team activities this offseason say Darrisaw has been practicing without his knee brace. For those who don't speak football medical jargon, that is a massive, massive signal. It suggests his knee has stabilized to the point where he no longer feels like he needs the extra protection. It's the kind of small detail that could mean everything for this franchise's Super Bowl hopes. Of course, with a player who has now dealt with injury adversity in every single season of his career, there's a growing chorus calling for caution. Ration his reps in training camp. Keep him out of preseason games entirely. Because let's be honest, nobody wants to see the quarterback taking snaps behind a backup left tackle in Week 1 because Darrisaw tweaked something in a meaningless August exhibition. The stakes are simply too high. Now let's flip over to the right side of that offensive line, where we find a man who might be the most disrespected star in the entire NFL. Brian O'Neill. 9 seasons in Minnesota. 3 times a team captain. 2-time Pro Bowler. A wall of a human being who, when both he and Darrisaw are healthy and rolling, forms one of the most dominant tackle bookends in professional football. And yet somehow O'Neill remains wildly underappreciated on a national level. Some would argue, and honestly it's hard to disagree, that on pure talent and consistency. O'Neal deserves to be mentioned in the same breath as the true elite right tackles of this generation. But media narratives and all-pro voting don't always reflect what the film shows. O'Neal had his own scary moment last season, too. He got rolled up in a game against the Steelers, the kind of play that makes every fan's stomach drop. Players getting tangled up and landing awkwardly on a limb. But true to form, O'Neal fought through it and delivered yet another rock-solid campaign. His numbers tell the story of a player still performing at an elite level, a run-blocking grade that ranked 4th among all right tackles in football, only 2 sacks allowed on the entire season, and a pass-blocking grade that, while not flashy, was steady and dependable in a season where the Vikings' offensive line was getting absolutely decimated by injuries at nearly every other position. And that's the part of this story that deserves way more attention. It wasn't just Darrisaw who battled health issues last year. The entire offensive line was hit by an avalanche of misfortune. Nearly every single lineman except one dealt with some kind of injury. It was a war of attrition up front, and somehow through all of it, this group still found ways to compete. That resilience says a lot about the culture this coaching staff has built, but it also raises a massive red flag heading into this season. Can this offensive line actually stay on the field for 16, 17 games? Because if they can, watch out, because the pieces are undeniably talented. Speaking of pieces, let's talk about the interior of this line for a second, because the story doesn't stop with the tackles. Donovan Jackson has been an absolute warrior, grinding his way back from a wrist injury and looking primed for a big year. The veteran center is stepping into a full off-season and training camp at the pivot position after some shuffling last year, and everyone wants to see what stability at that spot can do for the whole unit. And then there's the young lineman entering year 2 who desperately needs to take the leap that so many second-year players are expected to make. If even a couple of these storylines break in the Vikings' favor, this offensive line could transform from a question mark into one of the most feared units in the entire conference. Now here comes the part of the story that's going to make you sit up in your chair. Because this is where things get spicy. Every single year. One of the most respected football insiders in the business polls executives, coaches, and scouts from around the league to rank the best offensive tackles in football. Not fan votes. Not media narratives. The actual football people who watch tape for a living and make personnel decisions for a paycheck. And when that list came out this year, here's the jaw-dropping detail. Christian Darrisaw didn't crack the top 10. He landed in the honorable mention category. Let that sink in. A player many argue is a top 5 talent in the entire league when healthy, reduced to an afterthought on a list dominated by household names and legacy stars. But before you spiral into outrage, here's the reality check that actually makes this snub understandable, even if it still stings. Darrisaw missed so much time last season that it's genuinely difficult for outside evaluators to rank him purely on results. Talent evaluators can respect his tape while still needing to see a full healthy season before shooting him back up the rankings. And that's exactly what one anonymous AFC scout pointed out when discussing Darrisaw's placement despite the limited snaps. This is still considered one of the best combinations of feet, hands, and overall pass protection instincts in the sport, with legitimate force in the run game as well. In other words, the respect is there, the results just haven't caught up yet. And here's a fascinating footnote to all of this. Brian O'Neal also received votes in that same executive and scout poll. Further proof that the people who actually evaluate talent for a living see exactly what Vikings fans have been saying for years. This man is criminally overlooked. He may never get the household name recognition of some of the flashier tackles in this league, but around the league, in the rooms where personnel decisions actually get made, his name keeps coming up. All right, now let's get into the money. because nothing spices up an off-season storyline quite like contract drama, and this offensive line is absolutely swimming in it. Let's start with Darrisaw. At the time his current deal was signed, he was the highest-paid left tackle in football. Since then, the market has exploded, and multiple players have leapfrogged him in average annual salary. That's just the nature of the modern NFL. Today's record deal is tomorrow's middle-of-the-pack contract. But here's the part that should make every Vikings fan a little nervous. The team has a very clean, very tempting opt-out available after the 2027 season. No messy dead cap, no complicated negotiations, just a clean exit if they choose to walk away. And with a new regime running the front office, a regime with zero emotional ties to the player who signed that original deal, that opt-out becomes a real conversation, not just a hypothetical. Darrisaw is still only 27 years old, which in tackle years should be right in the heart of his prime. But when a player's entire career has been defined by unfulfilled potential due to constant injury, front offices start doing cold, hard math instead of sentimental math. If he can't stay on the field, even generational talent starts to look like a liability on the books. Then there's Brian O'Neill, who's staring down his own crossroads. He turns 31 this September, an age where father time starts knocking a little louder for offensive linemen. He's without a contract extension, and given that he's been such a beloved figure in that locker room, a captain, a leader, the kind of player who sets the tone in the building. There's a growing belief that general managers love to kick off training camp with a feel-good story. An extension for a franchise favorite is exactly the kind of move that boosts locker room morale right as the grind of camp begins. Nobody expects the Vikings to break the bank for a player entering his 30s, but a modest 3 or 4 year extension with real guaranteed money up front feels like the kind of move that makes sense for everybody involved. Keep the leader in the building. Keep the culture intact. Worry about the long-term numbers later. But here's the sobering reality lurking underneath all of this optimism. This very well could be the last season these two share a field together as Vikings. If the front office decides the opt-out on Darrisaw's deal makes financial sense, and if contract talks with O'Neill stall out, Minnesota could be looking at a complete changing of the guard on their offensive line as early as next offseason. It wouldn't be unprecedented. Just look at what strength almost overnight. If the front office decides that's the direction they want to go, this current tackle duo, as good as it's looked on paper, might already be on. Vikings brought in a restricted free agent tackle who spent time up in Buffalo, adding some proven depth to the room. And on top of that, they used a draft pick on a young tackle prospect who fell further than expected on draft weekend due to teams getting nervous about arm-length measurements, a small, almost silly technicality in a sport built on giant human beings hitting each other. But length concerns aside, the early buzz on this young tackle and the veteran addition forming the new backup duo has been genuinely promising. Depth like that gives the front office some breathing room, but let's be honest, replacing a healthy Darrisaw-O'Neill pairing is a tall order for anybody. So where does that leave us? A talented, physical, criminally underrated tackle duo that, when both men are fully healthy, can go bookend to bookend with anybody in football. A left tackle whose ceiling might be higher than almost anyone realizes, but who's never once made it through a full season unscathed. A right tackle who's quietly been one of the most durable, dependable, and undervalued players at his position for nearly a decade, now facing his own contract uncertainty as he enters the back nine of his career. An offensive line around them that got absolutely wrecked by the injury bug last year but showed real fight and resilience through it all. And a front office that, for the first time in years, has zero emotional attachment to either of these two stars, meaning every decision from here on out will be pure business. This is a story that could go one of two ways. Either this becomes the year Darisaw finally stays healthy for 16 games and reminds the entire league why he belongs in the true top tier of tackles, with O'Neal locking down his extension and riding off into the sunset as a Vikings legend. Or this ends up being the final chapter of one of the most talented, most snake-bitten tackle duos this franchise has ever had, with a full rebuild of the offensive line kicking off as soon as next spring. Either way, this is a storyline Vikings fans absolutely cannot afford to look away from as training camp approaches. So here's what we want to know from you. Do you think Darisaw finally breaks through and plays a full, healthy, dominant season? Do you think the Vikings lock up Brian O'Neal with an extension before the season even kicks off? Or do you think we're watching the final year of this tackle duo before a total changing of the guard up front? Drop your thoughts down in the comments below because we want to hear every single one of them. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, do us a huge favor. Smash that like button, drop a comment with your predictions, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into everything happening with your Minnesota Vikings. We've got so much more coming your way as training camp approaches, and trust us, you do not want to miss it. Until next time, Skol Nation, stay locked in.